Shalom. So today we're going to talk about differences between nationality and citizenship, right? So at first we're going to look at nationality. So when you're dealing with nationality, you're dealing with ethnicity, an ethnic group of people, right? So with ethnicity, you're looking at things like pedigree, nation, and culture, right? So with pedigree, you're dealing with genealogy, you're dealing with that ancestral chart list, right? And in our culture, it goes usually by the father. So the identity is in the pedigree, is in the ancestral list of the fathers, right? So this identity identifies a nation. So dealing with nation comes what? Language. Now, language is very, very important. That's part of your indigenous rights. And this is why when an invader comes into your land, you are being what? Denationalized. For example, you're in your land. I come on behalf of Rome. Wherever in your land I go, that becomes Rome, right? No. So the fact that it becomes Rome, guess what? Everything in that land is under the dominion of Rome. So guess what? Your language, you can no longer teach your children because once your land becomes Rome, I'm now taking away your indigenous rights. So I'm going to disinherit you from all of these things. So no, you cannot teach your language, your native language, to your descendants anymore. You're going to teach them my language, Rome. And that's what your children will now learn. Because if you continue teaching your children through your language, they are going to remember the ways of their fathers. No, we cannot have that because that's going to continually lead to rebellion, civil wars. We don't want that. We want us to be peace, right? So we need you guys to become Rome. It doesn't matter what you are called. It doesn't matter what your gods are called. It doesn't matter anything about your culture anymore. We're all one people. So no, you are Rome. So now learn our language, learn our ways. No, don't teach your children your customs anymore. Everything that matters in your culture, you don't need to, that's done away with. You don't need to do that anymore. Just do things the way we say you should do it, right? So with this new language, I'm also giving you a new name. So with this new name, you can no longer connect yourself to the ancestors of this land because you're no Arawak, you're no Taino, you're no Indians, you're no whatever. You have no connection with these ancestors because these ancestors are called these names. We are the rightful owners. So I just stole your indigenous rights. I just disinherited you from your rightful inheritance. So yes, your language and your identity is one and the same. You hear a person say he goes by such and such name, you can say, okay, he's with these people. A person say, I'm Shin Sang Tu, you say, okay, that's a Chinese. The name and the identity is one and the same. Your culture also is one and the same. Your culture, your identity, your language, they're all one and the same. Right? No, moving from language. Territory, that's also a very important part of it. Now, what do you have to do? I am Rome. I come into your place. Guess what? Now I have to dispossess you from this land. So you don't have any more right or claim to this territory. Your lands, your properties, and whatever else, your resources, guess what? They now become property of Rome. So not only did I just denationalize you, but also I am now doing what? Dispossessing you of your territory, of your properties, of everything that belonged to you. I'm taking away your birthrights. Taking away your indigenous rights was not enough for me. Now I'm taking your birthrights with it. All right. So we see that your territory and your language, they are very important, right? Now, spiritual practice and culture is one and the same. You cannot separate them. So your identity, your language, and your spiritual practices, they're all tied in together. Now, guess what? When I come and take over your territory and I change your language, guess what also needs to be compromised? Your spiritual practices. Not all wars can be won with the sword. So what you have to do sometimes is just get their priests and their prophets, their seers, to compromise. Just get them to alter some things a little bit, right? So guess what? If you can get them to abandon their spiritual practices and the only rights they're left with is just prayer. So make sure you don't do this ritual anymore. Don't do this ritual. All these rites that come with your culture. Get the priests to tell them that they no longer have to do this to get to their God. Prayer is enough. Using olive oil is enough. But these rituals that your God told your forefathers to do, get them to abandon it. You cannot separate culture and your spiritual practices. They are one and the same. And this is where religion comes in. Because guess what? Now that I come into your territory, you are now exposed to what? My ideologies, my language, my everything. Just like in Genesis, in the beginning, the serpent and Eve, guess what? Eve is now exposed to what? Somebody else's ideology, somebody else's belief, somebody else's way of whatever, somebody else's economic ways. And that's where the problem is. So it's the same thing, right? The spiritual practices, your territory, your language, your identity, that's all embedded in being part of a nation, right? So culture is a way of life. So your Hebraic rights would be a way of life. That's not separate from the Hebrew culture. So when you look at like the Christian community and the Hebrew community, what you'll find in common is that they all abandon the spiritual practices. Here's an example. Passover. One of the things about our rights regarding Passover is that a bone should not be broken. No, you'll see people keeping the Passover, and probably it's just two of them, the husband and the wife. So they'll go to the market and buy a piece of lamb or goat, and they keep the Passover. But the rite is performed in a specific way that no bone should be broken. So how can you buy a piece of lamb to keep a Passover? You're not doing it according to your rights. So this is why they get the priests to compromise your doctrines. That's done away with. You don't need to do this anymore. Just pray, have faith, and that's it. And we can blame all what they did in the name of white Jesus, but we know for sure that their white Jesus did not conquer the Maroons. Because what? The Maroons never compromised their spiritual practices. Never. So that's not a war that they could win by the sword. So this is why they don't allow us to keep our Hebraic rights. It's done away with. This person died and everything not doesn't matter anymore. Just pray, have faith, use your olive oil, and wait on the return of somebody. Right? So yes, the way of life is our culture, is our spiritual practices, the way they were ordained by our forefathers. Just as Moses gave it to us, it's the same way it should be performed today. Right? The customs, the art, just like like in the designing of our temples, right? They were to be designed in a specific way. So those were art first and many other things, right? Habits, the way we live, beliefs, values, behaviors, knowledge, all of these things were part of our culture. But guess what? We are exposed to the enemy's idea of things, their way of things, how things should be done. So we can no longer do what? Go back to our own knowledge, our own values, beliefs, spirituality. Doesn't matter how much you say you're keeping the law or you say you're not keeping the law. At the end of the day, guess what? We all lost our culture because we never had a culture where praying alone and using olive oil and have faith was our way. That was never our way, right? So all of these comes with nationality, right? Citizenship, on the other hand, is more of a political status. This is a piece of paper given to you by a certain government, right? So, for example, you were born in this land, you are affiliated with these people over here. You move to a foreign country. Guess what? Now the government give you a piece of paper saying that you are a resident, so you can do things like votes, and you can work there, and you can participate in certain other things of that place. But guess what? You are just a resident because you're residing there. Yeah, it's a legal, recognized rights and duties. These are just papers given, but you're not affiliated with the ethnic group of people. So, say for example, you move to China. China is a the Chinese, they're a people, they're a nation, right? If you go to China and you get a piece of paper that you are recognized as a Chinese citizen, guess what? That does not make you part of their ethnic group. You don't wear their clothes, you don't eat their foods, you don't worship the way they worship, customs, habits. You don't partake in all of that because you're not part of the nation. You're just a resident there by paperwork, not by pedigree. So I hope this gives a clear understanding between the two, nationality and citizenship. Shalom.